I am the Swarm. Author, Quantum Wizard. Chapter 241, Research. The raiders were ultimately just low-tier cannon fodder. After catching the Riken soldiers off guard initially, the weaknesses of a single-unit assault force became increasingly apparent. The gunships in the sky soon locked onto the tunnels from which the raiders were emerging. Concentrated fire rained down, scorching the ground with thick red energy beams, obliterating countless raiders before they even had the chance to surface. The raiders already on the ground found themselves without reinforcements and with no path of retreat. Though they had inflicted considerable casualties, their numbers dwindled rapidly under the soldiers' firepower. For over a century, the Rikens appeared to have devoted most of their research efforts to ship engines and related technologies. While energy weapon lethality had not improved significantly, firing rates had increased substantially, aided by advanced targeting and locking systems. Against such firepower, the remaining raiders quickly succumbed. After the battle, the land lay in ruins. Many of the components and equipment that had been transported and assembled were destroyed. The soldiers couldn't focus on safeguarding the materials during combat, and the raiders themselves had utilized these metallic constructs as cover. What better bullet shields than sturdy machinery? Post-battle statistics revealed approximately 500 tons of irreparably damaged metal materials, which could not be replenished quickly. The battle had also cost the Rikens over 1,000 soldiers, 80% of whom were killed outright, demonstrating the raiders' high lethality. The Riken commanders were somewhat relieved, however, that most of the casualties were inexperienced recruits. The Special Operations Forces, busy manning the gunships, emerged unscathed. Moreover, the surviving recruits began transforming into hardened veterans, with noticeable improvements in combat effectiveness. In total, over 5,000 raiders were killed during the engagement, most of them obliterated before reaching the surface. Had all of them emerged, Riken casualties would have been at least double. Both sides revealed a bit of their hand during the battle, though the Swarm took a slight loss. The Rikens' tactics and technology were largely what the Swarm had already expected. Conversely, the raiders lost their mystique, greatly diminishing their intimidation factor. During the post-battle video conference, "Gentlemen, the dissection report on the insectoid swarm has been distributed. Let's have Dr. Balt deliver a briefing," began General Masai. Dr. Balt, the rare Riken biologist, explained, "From the data, the swarm's internal circulatory, digestive, and nervous systems closely resemble those of the surface creatures we've previously captured. While there are minor differences, these can likely be attributed to variations in survival era or environment. This rules out the possibility of the swarm being an alien species. They are clearly native to this planet." The attendees nodded. Although not all were experts, no one had reached their current rank without a solid grasp of basic analysis. "So, these creatures are not the same species that attacked the Cat's Ear spaceship?" someone asked. "Definitely not. These swarm creatures lack the physiological adaptations required for survival in space." "I'm not so sure," a ship captain interjected. "We've only identified 3 varieties so far. Couldn't there be a strain adapted to space?" "Impossible. Evolution doesn't work that way. A single species cannot exhibit such extreme divergence," Dr. Balt asserted firmly. "The swarm's physiology is unremarkable aside from their unique forelimbs. These adaptations fall far short of what's needed for survival in space. Suggesting otherwise is absurd." "Fair enough, I'll defer to the expert," the captain conceded, realizing his question might have been naive. The discussion shifted to practical matters. "This battle revealed some of their secrets, but it hasn't improved our situation. They can emerge from underground at will, but we can't remain on high alert constantly," a strategist observed. "Agreed. Without knowing their exact numbers or devising effective countermeasures, our ground bases remain in significant danger." "This isn't a major problem," Dr. Balt interjected. "These creatures have very specific environmental requirements. Just as we can't breathe directly on the surface of T853, once we terraform the atmosphere to suit the Riken physiology, these native creatures will struggle to survive." "Understood. So, the challenge now is defending against their attacks during the terraforming process." "That's correct, but the terraforming project spans decades, possibly centuries, involving base construction, space habitats, and environmental modification," another officer added. "Dr. Balt, are there alternative solutions?" asked a captain. "Perhaps. We might develop a specialized toxin targeting their respiratory and nervous systems. This would require extensive experimentation, but it likely wouldn't take decades," Dr. Balt replied thoughtfully. Then we'll rely on you. Until then, we'll have to bolster our defenses against the swarm. Any further questions or comments? General Masai asked. A strategist raised his hand. General, I have one concern. Does the swarm exhibit intelligence? It's something I've wondered about myself, a captain replied. Their ambush on the patrol displayed precise coordination, suggesting higher intelligence. But today's battle seemed to show them acting more like beasts. Perhaps their earlier actions were merely instinctive, another strategist speculated. It's possible, another captain agreed. I've doubted from the start that such primitive creatures could coordinate on a global scale. Dr. Balt added, one more point, these swarm specimens lack organs for long-range communication or even basic vocalization. However, we captured a few live specimens for study. Observing their behavior, I discovered they use rapid limb strikes and friction to produce sounds, combined with pheromones, to communicate. He paused before continuing. We might exploit this trait. If we decode the meaning of their sounds and pheromones, we could disrupt their coordination or even drive them to attack one another. An excellent idea. But you're saying global coordination isn't feasible for them? Correct. In simple terms, while these swarm creatures are the same species, they don't belong to the same hive. Chapter 242, Blocking the Tunnels. Do you have evidence? A captain asked. Of course. Please watch these videos, Dr. Balt replied, operating the device before him. Several videos began playing on the large screen. The footage, captured at night, showed a group of swarm creatures transporting prey. They moved in unison, hunting small animals before quickly hauling them back into their burrows. These were recorded by our small drones last night, during the battle, Dr. Balt explained. The location, however, was on another continent. What does this prove? Someone asked. It indicates that their hunting schedule is highly fixed. Perhaps in their era, these creatures were at the very bottom of the food chain. Through long periods of predation, they adapted to hunt at times when losses were minimal, imprinting this into their instincts and preserving it until now, Dr. Balt elaborated. Pausing for a moment, he added, look at that creature spitting fusion energy. If these bugs coexisted with it, they might not even qualify as food. The assembled captains and strategists nodded in agreement. The analysis was logical and grounded. If that's the case, then they're much easier to deal with, someone remarked. Indeed. But judging from the combat footage, can they really achieve such precise coordination with such primitive communication methods? That's precisely what makes them terrifying creatures. Humph, they're just a bunch of low-level organisms. We were only caught off guard this time, another chimed in. You're not wrong. Dr. Balt, regarding the research you mentioned earlier, what do you need? General Masai asked. Manpower, as many as possible, and a large supply of experimental subjects, preferably live ones, Dr. Balt replied after some thought. Understood. I'll deploy troops to take down this nest. Given the heavy losses they suffered last night, the operation should be much easier. I'll instruct the special forces to capture as many live specimens as possible, General Masai assured him. The general's orders were promptly carried out. Near the original assembly site, the Rikans cleared a large area using incendiary bombs. Transport ships soon began delivering metal modules and soldiers to the new site, which quickly became a hive of activity. Despite the recent battle nearby, with the blood of comrades still staining the ground and black smoke rising from the wreckage, the new construction crews showed little concern. Confident in their understanding of the swarm's nocturnal habits, they deemed daylight operations perfectly safe. The construction site buzzed with activity. With additional manpower, massive excavators some over 30 to 40 meters tall were swiftly assembled and set to work. Enormous scoops dug up hundreds of cubic meters of soil and rock at a time, dumping the material into gigantic metal containers that transport ships then hauled away. Soon, a massive pit over 10 meters deep was carved out. As the excavation progressed, the site's boundaries expanded significantly. Meanwhile, large contingents of regular troops and special forces stood guard around the pit, ready for any sudden emergence of swarm creatures. By early evening, the pit had reached a depth of over 30 meters. The largest excavators were now visible only by the tops of their roofs. During the dig, numerous underground tunnels were uncovered. Particularly after reaching a depth of 20 meters, the number of passages increased dramatically, creating a dense, interconnected network. This forced the Rikans to slow the pace of excavation. Additionally, Heavily armored soldiers armed with flamethrowers were deployed near the tunnels for close-range defense. Fortunately, no incidents occurred. The swarm seemed to adhere strictly to their hunting schedule. Even as their tunnels were destroyed, none of them surfaced during the day. However, as the hunting time approached, the massive excavators began retreating from the pit. This was standard precaution. No one doubted that the pit would soon become a battlefield. Under the cover of protective troops, the engineers and machinery successfully withdrew. Soldiers then moved into the pit to set up defensive installations. Unlike the previous night, they avoided using traditional mines. The swarm creatures were too light to trigger them effectively. Instead, they deployed sensitive proximity mines, which were less powerful but much more responsive. Once laid, even the soldiers avoided the minefield, as these devices posed significant risks. "Captain, why don't we just bomb the tunnels or flood them with molten iron? That'd stop them from coming out," one Special Forces soldier suggested over the comms while setting up defenses. "Are you stupid?" Winter replied with a laugh. "If you collapse the tunnels, how do you know where they'll dig out next? That'd leave us even more passive." "Got it." The soldier's respect for his captain grew, his admiration practically radiating through his helmet. Winter, however, felt a bit sheepish. The same explanation had been given to him by his own superiors. Time ticked closer. "They're coming." A scout monitoring the instruments issued the warning. Boom! Boom! Explosions rang out continuously as swarm creatures emerging from the tunnels were immediately hit by the proximity mines. These small explosives, each about the size of an egg, were among the few remaining gunpowder-based weapons in the Wreckin arsenal. Despite their size, they packed a powerful punch, with a 3-meter kill radius. The swarm creatures' relatively fragile bodies couldn't withstand such blasts. They either died instantly or were left incapacitated. "Open fire," came the order from the commanding officer. Waves of red energy beams rained down on the pit, striking the creatures relentlessly. The combination of mines and concentrated fire inflicted heavy casualties. "Ha! Look at these brainless, low-tier creatures. They only caught us off guard before." "Exactly. Their fixed hunting schedule makes them ridiculously easy to counter. They're like fish in a barrel." Despite the heavy losses, the swarm's numbers remained overwhelming. Regardless of the casualties outside, the creatures continued surging out of the tunnels. The sight of their dead brethren did nothing to deter them. Through sheer numbers, the swarm eventually overwhelmed the minefield, climbing up the pit walls and nearing the Wreckin defensive line. Strange, any normal creature would have retreated by now. Maybe they're too primitive to even feel fear. These alien organisms might not conform to our theories. They're about to breach the line. Chapter 243, A Shift in Tactics. The swarm creatures in the pit, shielded by the bodies of their comrades, pressed forward relentlessly under heavy fire, inching closer to the pit's edge. "Deploy heavy firepower support." "Deploy the flamethrowers," ordered the field commander, calm despite the situation. The gunboats, already primed, unleashed thicker, more intense red energy beams, bombarding the swarm below. Along the pit's edge, heavily armored flamethrower troops advanced, directing streams of fuel downward. With the help of accelerants, roaring flames erupted, incinerating the leading swarm creatures. Some fell off the walls, while others burned as they clung to the dirt. Combined with the aerial bombardment, the assault was repelled, driving the swarm back into their tunnels. The day passed in cycles of attack and defense. Though the swarm launched several charges, they achieved no significant breakthroughs. In the end, they retreated to their burrows, signaling the battle's conclusion. This skirmish dealt a heavy blow to the swarm, leaving tens of thousands of carcasses behind. Conversely, the Wreckins suffered no fatalities, with only minor injuries, most caused by friendly fire. This victory marked an overwhelming success. To celebrate, the Wreckins held a small feast. Special Forces hunted over 100 bull demons, which were prepared for the event. Every participant in the construction and combat efforts had their fill, a rare treat of natural meat that many Wreckins had never tasted in their lifetimes. Time flew, and by the third night, the pit had deepened to 70 meters and expanded to nearly a square kilometer in area. That evening, the swarm launched another suicidal charge. However, the seasoned and well-prepared Wreckin troops easily repelled the attack, incinerating and obliterating countless swarm creatures. This time, there was no panic among the ranks, nor even accidental injuries. "They seem to have exhausted their tactics," a captain commented during a discussion, watching a live video feed. What could you expect from low-level creatures? Another captain chuckled. True, we overestimated them at first. Still, their numbers are surprising, a strategist noted. Despite 2 days of heavy losses, their forces don't appear to have dwindled. That's indeed a concern. But as long as we proceed cautiously, we'll eventually dig our way to their main nest. Then, let's see where they can hide. Exactly. 1 week later, the pit was 300 meters deep and spanned 3 square kilometers. The Reckons unearthed and destroyed a vast network of swarm tunnels during this time. Attempts to explore the tunnels with ground teams were largely unsuccessful. In the confined, dark spaces, the elite soldiers were no match for the swift and deadly raiders. Despite this, nightly battles in the pit resulted in the deaths of at least 100,000 swarm creatures. Yet their numbers seemed endless. These nightly skirmishes became routine, an unspoken ritual of attack and defense. Their intelligence must be incredibly low. After all this time, they still don't realize this path is blocked, remarked a strategist during a meeting. Do they think they can exhaust our ammunition supply? Someone joked. Perhaps, another chimed in. Dr. Balt did say their brain capacity is extremely small. Still, it feels off. Yes, how can they sustain such massive numbers? How large is their underground nest? What are they eating to maintain such a vast population? Maybe they farm their own food, someone laughed. I once read about insects on our home planet that cultivated crops. Or they could have additional tunnel exits. Their territory might be far larger than we imagine. But events often change without warning. That day, as the construction crews continued excavation, a sudden attack broke out. The swarm surged from the tunnels in a frenzy. Although the instruments provided an early warning, the creatures moved too quickly. The Reckons, lulled into complacency by the previous day's routine, had left their daytime defenses lax. The swarm broke into the worksite, slaughtering numerous Reckons before the defenders could react. By the time the soldiers were ready to open fire, the swarm had mingled with the workers. Firing would likely result in massive friendly fire casualties and unacceptable risk. The soldiers had no choice but to engage in close combat, some even resorting to melee weapons. Perhaps emboldened by recent victories, the Reckons underestimated the raiders' lethality, daring to face them up close. They were quickly reminded of the terror of the raiders' rapid maneuvers and blade-like forelimbs. The battlefield turned into a one-sided massacre, with the Reckons now the victims. In the end, the chaos was quelled not because the Reckons repelled the swarm, but because nearly every soldier and worker on site had been killed. The swarm's relentless onslaught left the pit strewn with Reckon corpses. The swarm then surged upward, charging toward the rim of the pit. Seeing the disaster unfold, the commanding officer ordered an all-out assault, disregarding the few remaining survivors and machinery. Energy beams rained down, and dozens of incendiary bombs followed, setting the entire pit ablaze. In minutes, the swarm was reduced to ash. Yet the creatures showed no fear, and as the flames subsided, they surged forward once more. Have they gone mad? The captains and strategists convened for an emergency video meeting to watch the unfolding battle. They've changed their behavior patterns, one noted grimly. Could they have been feigning their routine to lull us into complacency for this counterattack? Unlikely, Dr. Balt interjected. Their brain capacity doesn't support such complex planning. Then what's causing this? Judging from the footage, our losses this time are catastrophic. Indeed, complacency had cost the Reckons dearly. The construction team and the close combat security forces were wiped out, and much of their machinery was destroyed in the ensuing bombardment and fires. The casualty count was expected to exceed 10,000, the worst losses they had ever suffered. Perhaps we've finally reached their core, Dr. Balt speculated. Chapter 244, The Cocoon. Perhaps it's because we've reached their core. Dr. Balt suggested. The room fell silent as everyone mulled over the possibility. It seemed highly likely. Send in more personnel. We'll take this underground nest today, ordered General Masai, the expedition fleet's supreme commander. Following the general's directive, Lieutenant Colonel Cross, the officer in charge of the battlefield's regional base, deployed nearly all her forces, leaving only a skeleton crew to maintain base operations. Lieutenant Colonel Cross was an exceptionally young female Reckon, a top graduate of the Military Academy's command program, and the youngest captain in the expedition fleet. Ordinarily, such a position would be out of reach for someone with her limited experience. However, her twin sister worked in a classified research institute, and their family wielded considerable influence. With such backing, her appointment was not entirely surprising. Even so, managing the base as the commanding officer had left her overwhelmed. First, a patrol team mysteriously disappeared, almost costing her a court-martial. Fortunately, she had been the first to detect enemy activity, and with the intervention of Major General Porter, a family friend of her superior, she not only escaped punishment but also received reinforcements. However, her sector soon became the focal point for the enemy threat. The first underground cavern to trigger an alarm was chosen as the main breakthrough site, drawing a massive influx of engineering and combat personnel, most of whom were beyond her direct control. The situation turned her position into a logistical and political nightmare. After the recent meeting, Major General Porter urged her to seize the opportunity. Since the battlefield was in her jurisdiction, her leadership in capturing the underground nest would earn her enough credit for a promotion. Determined to succeed, she gambled everything, mobilizing all available forces. Had she not feared ridicule, she might have deployed the base's cooks as well. The battle was grueling. The swarm launched a counter-offensive with at least 200,000 raiders. While the initial assault caught the Rikans off guard and inflicted severe casualties, subsequent waves devolved into suicidal charges. The raiders' fragile bodies were no match for the dense gunfire from the Rikan defenses. 3 hours later, the battle ended. Unlike previous engagements, the swarm did not retreat to their tunnels but fought to the last insect. After a cursory battlefield cleanup, Rikan forces split into teams and began advancing into multiple tunnel entrances. The soldiers proceeded cautiously, with flamethrowers at the forefront. Other units remained on high alert, ready for ambushes from hidden raiders. To their surprise, they encountered no resistance after advancing several hundred meters. The absence of attacks was highly unusual. Previously, their forces had barely ventured 100 meters underground before being forced back by relentless raider assaults. Could that last wave have been all they had left? A soldier speculated, startling his tense comrades. "Shut up, you idiot," his superior barked, making the soldier shrink back. Despite the rebuke, many secretly agreed with the hypothesis. The swarm's behavior had indeed been uncharacteristically strange. The underground passageways were complex, with teams frequently regrouping at intersections before splitting up again. Eventually, most squads converged in a massive cavern. The cavern's walls were lined with layer upon layer of white silk, interspersed with bulbous growths that exuded an eerie presence. "What is this stuff? It's creepy. It's sticky. It's like thin rope," the soldiers muttered, puzzled by the alien material. They had never seen anything like it on Rikan Prime. "What do we do, Captain?" The query came from Winter's squad. As a special operations unit, they had been stationed at the battlefield from the outset and were now naturally leading the exploration. Winter's 50-strong team was the most elite among the assembled forces. "Can we contact the base?" Winter asked. "No, there's magnetic interference. Communications are down," the communications officer replied. "Stay vigilant and keep watch. Let's take a closer look." "Captain, this place is huge. Should we fire off a couple of flares for illumination?" Without responding, Winter approached the silk-covered walls. He touched the fibers and tried to rub them off his glove, finding their adhesive quality unusually strong. Reaching for his flamethrower, he applied fire to the silk. It shriveled and curled but did not ignite, showing resistance to burning. After some thought, Winter instructed, "Fire 2 flares into the open area." "Yes, Captain." The flares lit up the cavern like twin suns, momentarily blinding soldiers who hadn't removed their night vision goggles in time. Despite their tense scans, no enemies appeared. "Strange. Are the bugs really all gone?" "Groups of 3, spread out and investigate. Stay alert. I don't want anyone becoming a cautionary tale," Winter ordered, sensing no immediate danger. The soldiers moved carefully, covering each other as they spread out. "Captain, over here. Look at this," one of the operatives called out, standing beside a bulbous silk cocoon, visibly intrigued. Winter quickly joined him. The operative, driven by curiosity, had already sliced open the cocoon with his tactical knife. Inside was a small wild animal, a species Winter recognized from the grasslands. He had even led a team to capture some specimens for the base's labs. While these animals couldn't be used without special processing, Winter briefly wondered how they might taste. Catching himself, he banished the thought and refocused. He inspected several other silk-wrapped cocoons, cutting them open one by one. Each contained a similar grassland animal, all common species. This must be their storage room, a place where they keep their food, Winter deduced as his team gathered around. Chapter 245, The Granary. Ha! I thought they didn't need to eat, but look at all this stuff they've hidden away, one soldier remarked. Wow, this is a massive granary, another exclaimed. As the team examined the white silk-wrapped bulges hanging from the ground, walls, and even the cavern ceiling, a wave of curiosity rippled through the ranks. But then... ah! A sudden scream shattered the air. Winter reacted instantly, sprinting over in a few strides. What's going on? He demanded. The screaming soldier wasn't from his squad but a regular guard unit, though his rank was significantly higher, giving him the authority to question the situation. Sir, there's someone inside, the shaken soldier stammered, pointing at one of the silk-wrapped bulges. He had followed Winter's earlier example and sliced open a cocoon out of curiosity, only to be startled by what he saw. Judging by his reaction, he was still a rookie, with nerves that hadn't fully hardened despite prior combat experience. Winter leaned in and peered through the slit in the cocoon. Inside, a pair of wide, unblinking eyes stared back at him, unnervingly intense. Even Winter, with his steel nerves, was startled, stumbling back 2 steps before composing himself. Steeling his resolve, he approached again. This time, prepared for the sight, he looked more carefully and realized the cocoon held a reckon. The man's pale blue face looked deathly pale, and his large eyes conveyed a complex mix of terror, confusion, and relief. Winter marveled at how much emotion could be transmitted through a single gaze. The man's body was curled up within the cocoon. Whether it was due to the binding silk or some other reason, he remained motionless, even after being discovered. His lips were tightly sealed, giving him the appearance of a lifeless corpse if not for those vivid eyes. Winter immediately called over several teammates, and together they carefully cut open the cocoon, freeing the trapped Riken. Yet, despite the removal of the bindings, the man remained immobile. A special operations soldier used a handheld scanner, waving it over the man's face. Moments later, a string of information appeared. Captain, it's one of the missing patrolmen from the initial disappearance, the soldier reported. Winter's eyes widened. Though he had suspected as much, confirming the man's identity still left him astonished. After all, nearly 10 days had passed since the patrol had gone missing. Still alive after all this time? That's one lucky bastard, Winter muttered. Surviving without food for so long bordered on miraculous. Carson, report back to the base immediately. Everyone else, carefully open the remaining cocoons. Be mindful there could be more of our comrades inside, Winter ordered. Carson, the team's communications specialist, slung his equipment and sprinted back along their entry route, adjusting his gear to check for signals as he ran. Thankfully, he managed to relay the message without incident once he cleared the magnetic interference zone. Upon receiving the update, Lieutenant Colonel Cross promptly escalated the report. This was no longer an isolated issue. Every ground base had experienced patrol disappearances. If even some of the missing personnel were still alive, the implications were grave. Cross, brief everyone on the situation, General Masai said. Within minutes, an emergency video conference was convened. Thanks to the fleet's readiness, the captains and strategists were all standing by, allowing for such swift action. Everyone, Cross began, a special operations team has discovered what appears to be an insectoid swarm granary. Inside, they found one of the missing patrolmen alive but immobilized and unable to speak for unknown reasons. Her summary left the participants in a tense silence. Only one survivor, a strategist finally asked. Cross shook her head. The situation on the ground is complex. Search and rescue operations are ongoing, but communication remains hindered, so specifics are still unclear. Silence fell again. We'll wait for further updates, one captain sighed. Time passed as combat engineers worked to establish wired connections in the tunnels. Gradually, more footage and data streamed in, revealing massive subterranean chambers lined with white silk, cocoon-like bulges, and other eerie details. The initial survivor proved not to be alone. As rescue efforts continued, additional survivors were discovered. By the end of several hours, all the silk-wrapped pods including those hanging from the ceiling had been opened with the aid of specialized equipment. In total, 112 survivors were rescued. This number was remarkable. Cross's base, which had been the first to detect anomalies, suffered the fewest losses. Out of the 21 patrol teams initially attacked, each consisting of 10 members, almost half had been recovered alive. However, the discovery posed a new problem. For Cross, the rescue was a success, reflecting well on her command. But for other base commanders, the news was a headache. Most of the missing patrol members were rookies, but that didn't diminish the obligation to save them. Now that their survival was known, abandoning them was out of the question. Refusal to attempt rescue would be seen as heartless, ending any commander's career and risking backlash. In the isolated confines of an interstellar expedition, being ostracized by peers could be far more dangerous than any official punishment. Yet the logistics of rescue were daunting. It had taken nearly 10 days of sustained effort to breach the granary. Replicating this feat at other swarm nests wasn't feasible given the time constraints. Captives elsewhere likely couldn't survive for much longer. Slow, methodical digging would only doom them further. The only option was to send troops directly into the nests, fighting their way down as quickly as possible. But previous attempts to storm swarm tunnels had resulted in heavy casualties. Now, they were expected to assault multiple unexplored nests simultaneously, a daunting and perilous task. Although logic dictated that the captives be abandoned, such an act was unthinkable for a civilization composed of sentient, empathetic individuals. The decision weighed heavily on the gathered commanders, leaving the conference room in a pensive, oppressive silence. Chapter 246, Analysis. First, send the injured back to the base to determine what's wrong with them, and ensure they're isolated. General Masai concluded the meeting. The initial step was to ascertain whether the rescued individuals had any chance of survival. If not, the current concerns would naturally resolve themselves. An elite medical team was dispatched, taking off from an orbital battleship and descending into the atmosphere to land at Cross Base. Hours later, a report was placed in front of the commanders. The findings revealed that the rescued individuals were afflicted by a peculiar toxin. This toxin not only paralyzed the central nervous system, effectively blocking nerve signals, but also acted as a preservative. After being injected with the toxin, the recipient's consciousness remained awake, yet their bodies entered a state of dormancy. Their bodily functions nearly halted, significantly reducing consumption. This explained why the rescued individuals had remained fresh for days without food or water. The medical team's experts were astonished and remarked that, had the Riken planet discovered this toxin earlier, it could have greatly expedited research on space hibernation drugs. Despite this, the toxin still held tremendous research value. So, you're saying this is just a form of anesthetic? It isn't lethal to organisms? Once the effects wear off, they just need some recuperation, a captain asked during the video conference. Privately, however, he thought this was far from good news. In this Riken expedition, every fleet commander had ties to various factions behind the scenes, corporations, families, allies, and more. This was, effectively, a coalition force. One of the ground bases belonged to the faction he was aligned with. If a rescue mission became necessary, he would inevitably have to deploy troops. But in the current situation, where reinforcements were unavailable, the number of troops at his disposal directly translated to his bargaining power. Bargaining power determined how much he could claim when it came time to divide the spoils after the alien species was eradicated. Naturally, he was reluctant to see his forces significantly depleted, especially since the swarm's lairs were veritable meat grinders. So, how long does this anesthetic last? A staff officer pursued another line of inquiry. If the captured patrol members could endure for a longer period, this could help shape a more cautious rescue plan. If injected every 7 days, the condition could be maintained for several months, the medical expert explained. However, before the attendees could breathe a sigh of relief, the expert added, but it's unlikely the swarm would store food for that long. In the hive we captured this time, they took 210 personnel. The expert left the rest unsaid, but the implication was clear: 210 were taken, 112 had been found alive. Where were the rest? The longer they delayed, the lower the survival rate for those in other hives. General Masai cleared his throat to shift the discussion. Next, let's discuss how to rescue the captured patrol members. Dr. Balt, how is your research progressing? Do you have any findings that might aid this operation? General, we've had very little time, so our research into the swarm's pheromones is still in its infancy, Dr. Balt admitted. Seeing General Masai's furrowed brows, he quickly added, however, we have made some progress. We've set up several experimental chambers where we placed captured raiders to observe their interactions. We've used equipment to record the sounds of their physical movements during these exchanges. Have you deciphered the meaning of these sounds? A captain asked, somewhat excited. Of course not yet, Dr. Balt replied, taking a dramatic pause. The captain resisted an urge to curse, unsure if it was appropriate to voice his frustration. Dr. Balt continued, although we haven't decoded the meanings, we've broken the audio recordings into segments and reassembled them into new sequences. And what's the point of that? Another captain asked. Each of these sounds holds specific meanings. Strung together, they convey a complete message. By scrambling them, it's akin to rearranging words in a sentence, something that might leave the swarm thinking, I recognize each word, but what does this mean? He elaborated and then quietly added, probably. Maybe. The crowd felt an overwhelming sense of unreliability. Sensing their disappointment, Dr. Balt hurriedly added, time constraints are the main issue. But we've observed that the scrambled audio still produces some effects. When played for raiders, they exhibit visible agitation. If not for their pheromone-based recognition mechanisms, they might even attack each other. Based on this, we've developed a small tool you could think of as a toxin. When dispersed into an area, it effectively blocks the spread of pheromones. Simultaneously, it disrupts the swarm's nervous system, inhibiting cholinesterase. This induces heightened agitation, overstimulation, and eventual death. However, this process takes a bit of time. How long? A staff officer inquired. Our experiments indicate about a few hours. Combat, though, happens in moments. A few hours? By then, the battle would be long over. Nonetheless, the ability to block the swarm's communication made the tool worthy of deployment. Is it difficult to produce? Another officer asked. Here lies the problem, Dr. Balt admitted. Currently, the toxin is only a laboratory prototype, far from mass production. The production process isn't particularly complex, but we lack the necessary manufacturing equipment. The crowd mentally cursed him for wasting their time. With the rescue mission imminent, this invention was useless for now. Ahem. General Masai cleared his throat again. Dr. Balt, do you have anything else to add? His intention was to give Balt an out, but to his dismay, the scientist nodded and continued, I do have one more point. General Masai felt a pang of regret but motioned for him to proceed. This time, our findings deep within the lair suggest the existence of a swarm species capable of producing white filaments. For now, we've termed them weavers. Previously, we hypothesized the swarm is a highly specialized race, with raiders excelling in frontal assaults, burrowers adept at tunneling, and assassins specialized in stealth. The paralytic toxin found in the survivors' bodies is likely associated with the assassins. The underground granary requires at least assassins and weavers for its maintenance, though it's possible they are the same species. Given the granary's scale, maintaining it would require a significant number of these creatures. Yet when our teams entered, they found none. Previously, we've only encountered raiders. Where are the rest? The granary connects to a network of tunnels. Since our focus was on the rescue mission, our team sealed those pathways but didn't explore further. They might be hiding there, Cross added. The battlefield being near her base meant she had the most detailed information. Dr. Balt shook his head. What I want to discuss isn't where they're hiding but the implications of their behavior. Chapter 247, Operation. Doctor, what exactly are you trying to say? A Recon captain asked impatiently. This man had just delivered a lengthy monologue, none of which seemed related to the rescue operation. Everyone, I used to think they were simple, brainless beasts. But think about the raiders' behavior during that last battle. Tens of thousands of them fought to the death without a single one retreating. Underground, not a single bug lingered in tunnels hundreds of meters deep. This behavior, to be honest, would be difficult even for our troops to achieve. So I believe this isn't the behavior of mindless beasts. My earlier assumptions were wrong. If their functions are so highly specialized, could there be a type of bug specifically responsible for command and coordination? These would be the brains of the entire swarm, possessing a certain level of intelligence. That's why we found almost no brain structures in the raiders, they don't need them. Their sole purpose is to fight, while the thinking is handled by other bugs specialized for this task. Perhaps we can call them thinkers. The room grew tense. Fighting a pack of wild beasts was entirely different from combating an intelligent species. No wonder the swarm was so difficult to deal with. This explanation made sense. Dr. Balt's hypothesis had convinced them. Furthermore, where do all these bugs come from? There must also be breeders responsible for reproduction. We still don't know how many other types of bugs exist, but I have a bad feeling about this, though I can't pinpoint why. Doctor, maybe you're overthinking it. You were the one who confidently claimed they were just brainless, low-level creatures, a captain said snidely, taking advantage of his personal grudge against Dr. Balt to mock him. In any case, I've said my piece. Everyone, please stay vigilant. Dr. Balt did not argue. Those were indeed his earlier words, but further research had changed his perspective. All right, let's get back on track and discuss how to rescue those patrol teams, General Masai said, steering the conversation back to the mission. An hour later, the meeting concluded. The Riken launched a massive operation. Numerous transport ships ferried personnel and equipment between the surface and orbital bases, steadily deploying resources onto the Great Dawn planet. The military was mobilized, and the rescue operation commenced. 11 underground swarm nests needed to be breached, with their locations already identified by scout drones. Over 200,000 Riken troops were distributed across the 11 battlefields. Based on data from the previously conquered nest, the straight-line distance from the surface to the granary was less than a kilometer. However, the labyrinthine tunnels required extensive manpower to navigate. Despite this, only a limited number of soldiers could enter the tunnels at any one time. Thus, most of the troops remained outside to guard against a counterattack. The previous battlefield, where a digging operation nearing the granary provoked a deadly swarm charge, was still fresh in their minds. A large number of gunships patrolled the skies, keeping watch for ambushes. Transport and rescue ships stood by, and a field hospital was hastily set up 5 kilometers from the battle zone. The Riken's efficiency was impressive. Within just one day, all preparations were complete, and the offensive began the following night. Taking advantage of the swarm's regular hunting patterns, the Riken first ambushed raiders emerging from cave entrances, weakening the enemy's combat strength. Without pause, the assault troops, led by special forces units, stormed the tunnels. To prevent underground collapses, explosives were avoided. Instead, flamethrowers became the primary weapon for firepower suppression. The soldiers wore heavy protective suits and carried oxygen tanks. Flamethrowers consumed large amounts of oxygen, which was scarce in the tunnels, necessitating their own breathing equipment. Biological experts noted that the toxins generated by flamethrower combustion, combined with oxygen depletion, would also inflict significant additional damage on the swarm. Concerns about how oxygen depletion might affect the granary were conveniently ignored. The soldiers advanced steadily, splitting into smaller groups at intersections to cover more ground. The operation proceeded unusually smoothly. Although the swarm launched attacks, the flamethrowers proved devastating in the narrow tunnels. Even bugs that charged through the flames were heavily injured, becoming easy targets for soldiers following behind. However, the swarm's relentless aggression forced the flamethrowers to work non-stop. Charred bug carcasses clogged the passageways, necessitating frequent clearing. Consequently, after 2 hours, the troops had advanced less than 500 meters. The attacking force had even cycled through 3 waves due to depleted fuel and oxygen. Fortunately, Riken casualties were minimal, with most injuries caused by friendly fire a common hazard in the cramped tunnels. Meanwhile, commanders monitored the battlefield via real-time feeds. The operation is going well. These beasts underestimated the power of technology, one captain remarked, visibly relaxed as he watched the footage. It seems Dr. Balt's concerns were unnecessary, added the captain who often clashed with Balt, his tone laced with mockery. Who would have thought they'd be so fragile? And to think we were worried before. This method is consuming a lot of fuel and ammunition, though. Don't worry. That's a small price compared to lives lost. Once we secure a safe environment, factories can be set up quickly, and supplies will be easy to replenish. True enough. At this pace, we should finish by tomorrow. I wonder how many people we'll rescue. Hard to say. That biologist later analyzed that rescuing nearly half of the captives previously was due to us depleting so many bugs, which increased the available food. These other nests haven't been weakened, so losses might be heavier. The results don't matter, do they? We're doing what they hoped we'd do. Exactly. Meanwhile, at Lieutenant Colonel Cross's base. Since the nearby swarm nest had been severely weakened, the Riken had been operating there without further attacks for some time. Now, with operations underway elsewhere, most of the forces had been redeployed, leaving only Cross's garrison to guard the enormous pit. Chapter 248, meaning. Though it was late at night, the 50-meter-tall floodlights at the camp illuminated the area as if it were daytime. Captain, while the other units are out fighting, we're stuck here guarding a pit. It's so boring, one of Winter Squad's members complained. Originally under the direct command of Major General Porter, the squad had been assigned to investigate the disappearance of patrol teams. They remained at this location afterward. Later, when Major General Porter needed to replenish Lieutenant Colonel Cross's forces, the entire Winter Squad was reassigned under her command. Overall, this reshuffle was highly beneficial for Cross. She had lost ordinary recruits, but the replacements included a special forces team. Only her doting superiors would orchestrate such a maneuver. Additionally, the 100-plus personnel rescued from earlier operations were also placed under her command, increasing the size of her forces rather than depleting them. For this current assault on other nests, Cross had to deploy forces in support. When her base's neighboring swarm nest was attacked previously, other factions had lent their aid. Now that others needed assistance, she was duty-bound to reciprocate. Moreover, one of the nests targeted this time was assigned to her faction as the primary assault force. However, with only one elite special operations team at her disposal, Cross was reluctant to send them into a situation where command would be temporarily out of her hands. If they were deployed on the front lines and suffered casualties, it would be distressing. Even if they avoided serious injuries, minor harm would still weigh heavily on her. Thus, she sent out most of her regular troops, along with several gunships and transport ships, while leaving her base's defenses slightly undermanned. The nest near her base had been devastated and was unlikely to pose a threat in the short term, so the reduced defensive strength wasn't a major concern. Winter Squad, meanwhile, was assigned to guard the pit under the pretense that elite personnel were required to oversee such a critical location. "Come on, isn't being bored better than fighting bugs?" another squad member replied. Yeah, I know you're claustrophobic. No need to explain, we all get it. Haha, someone teased. Shut it. You wanna fight me? Bring it on. I'm not scared. Before long, the two soldiers were wrestling, their teammates cheering them on rather than intervening, stoking the skirmish with loud encouragement. Laughter echoed through the group. Winter watched his squad's antics without interfering. He understood that this assignment was a calculated move by their new commander to protect the Special Forces team. Despite the personnel reductions, the defensive structures hadn't been dismantled, and the tunnels were riddled with sensor mines. Moreover, since the nest's granary had been breached, the swarm hadn't made any further moves. Not a single bug had been spotted in the tunnels, likely having retreated after determining they were outmatched. With minimal pressure to defend, Winter allowed his team to relax and bond. He also took the opportunity to enjoy a rare moment of respite. After all, battles could erupt again at any moment. The cross base remained brightly lit, but with most of the troops either supporting operations elsewhere or guarding the pit, its defenses were relatively thin. Scattered groups of sentries patrolled the fortress-like structures, checking for damage to surveillance equipment and chasing away wild animals. The surrounding grasslands were home to numerous wildlife species, and the occasional bold creature would venture close to the massive fortification out of curiosity. Such creatures rarely returned after being enthusiastically invited into the base by the Riken soldiers. In one shadowy corner, two sentries loitered in boredom. "Hey, I heard you were captured by those bugs a while back," one of them suddenly asked. The base was so understaffed that even maintaining sentry duties was a challenge. As a result, lightly injured personnel from previous battles were assigned to patrols. Injured soldiers weren't paired together, of course. As a healthy serviceman, he had been separated from his usual partner and assigned a new one, a survivor of the swarm's clutches. This new partner, though uninjured, had endured captivity. Now fully recovered, he was noticeably more combat-capable than most injured personnel. Curious about his partner's experience, the sentry hesitated briefly before finally asking. "Ah, that was an unforgettable experience," the new partner murmured, lost in thought. The sentry wondered if he had opened an old wound. Being powerless, waiting for death, it must have been harrowing. His partner snapped out of his reverie, a strange smile crossing his face. "You know what? In that place, I discovered a new purpose for my existence." "What?" The sentry was bewildered, unsure of what his partner meant. Could he have suffered some kind of brain damage? Overexposure to sedatives was said to cause cognitive issues. He decided to report this after their shift. "I saw God. He is my new purpose," the partner continued, his tone unsettling. The sentry regretted bringing up the topic. You okay? Should I take you to the medical bay? I'm fine. Better than ever, actually. Too bad you'll never get to meet God. What are you The sentry's words were cut off as a razor-sharp appendage pierced his throat, blood splattering his breathing mask. Through the haze of pain and shock, he dimly heard his partner mutter, God has no use for the worthless. I was just lucky. His vision faded as consciousness left him. Behind him, a raider with optical camouflage emerged, its special adaptations shimmering. The raider ignored the new partner and silently departed. The COMM link crackled to life. Group 3, Status Report. The new partner smiled faintly. Command Center, this is Group 3. All clear. Nearby, swarms of raiders glided down from the night sky, evading the base's seismic sensors as they landed outside the fortress. Once on the ground, they moved with practiced ease, navigating the base's perimeter like it was their own territory. In no time, the sentries were systematically eliminated, each silenced before they could react. Any of the irregular sentries who had outlived their usefulness were also quietly dispatched, leaving no trace of the breach. Chapter 249, The Invasion. The exterior of the entire base was constructed from an extremely sturdy metal and a transparent glass-like material, forming a sealed structure with an independent air circulation system. The glass-like material, despite appearing fragile, was astonishingly hard and thick. Even concentrated artillery fire would struggle to breach it in a short period. Ironically, the seemingly sturdier metal sections were weaker in certain areas due to functional requirements. For example, several exits used by maintenance personnel to repair instruments and equipment were only 1/2 to 1/3 the thickness of the fortress walls. The swarm quickly identified these weak points. Raiders maneuvered cautiously into the blind spots of surveillance equipment near the doors and destroyed them. Some bugs, slightly different in appearance from the raiders, crawled forward and raised their abdomens, spraying viscous liquid onto the doors. This was the oldest and most basic acid spraying mechanism. After subsequent improvements, the strength of the acid increased by hundreds of times, enough to corrode these tough metal barriers. Even the inner walls of the emission tubes within the bugs' bodies had been enhanced, allowing them to spray acid as far as 20 meters. In the base's monitoring room, one of the screens suddenly turned to static. Damn it! This piece of junk broke again. Whoever procured these things ought to be court-martialed, complained a Recon soldier. He picked up a communicator. Team 3, the camera in front of Maintenance Passage 7 is down. Go check it out. Unfortunately, despite waiting for some time, he received no response. He tapped the communication device in frustration and suddenly noticed several more cameras going dark. Alarmed, a foreboding sense of danger struck him. Before he could call on another team to investigate, the sharp wail of an alarm filled the air. On another monitor displaying the internal layout of the base, several rooms connected to maintenance passages turned red one after another, indicating structural damage and the intrusion of external air. The soldier quickly looked to another wall filled with screens showing footage from within the base. The video feeds for the rooms connected to the passages had gone dark, and the linked passage cameras were also rapidly being taken offline. Before one of the screens blacked out, he caught a glimpse of an endless swarm of bugs surging forward. Shocked, he immediately called his colleagues and sounded the alarm. Soon, the warning, initially confined to the monitoring room, reverberated throughout the entire base. At this moment, Lieutenant Colonel Cross, the base's commanding officer, was in the middle of a video conference. The piercing alarm startled the high-ranking participants, who quickly checked to ensure the alert wasn't coming from their own ships. Cross, what's going on over there? Major General Porter, noticing the sound originating from Cross's video feed, was the first to voice his concern. As her senior, he was quick to ask about the situation. Cross was equally bewildered. She had no idea why the alarms in her supposedly secure fortress base were blaring. Just then, her adjutant whispered a few words to her, and her expression shifted to one of utter disbelief. What is it, Cross? Porter pressed, sensing she now knew something critical. The bugs, they've invaded my base. Cross stammered, still struggling to comprehend the reality. Not only was she incredulous, but the other commanders in the meeting also found it hard to believe. Impossible. Based on the bugs' demonstrated combat capabilities, even ignoring how they bypassed detection systems, they shouldn't be able to breach the fortress defenses, a captain interjected, his skeptical gaze directed at Cross. It was clear he viewed her as a privileged upstart and was eager to challenge her competence. Silence. General Masai, the supreme commander of the expedition fleet, cut through the noise. Cross, organize your defenses immediately and determine if you need reinforcements. Also, grant us access to your base's surveillance feed. I want to see what's happening on site. Cross felt a pang of helplessness. While the surveillance footage within the base didn't offer much visibility, the idea of granting others access to her domain was uncomfortable. However, with her base compromised, she had no choice. After summoning the base's AI to grant the requested access, the surveillance footage was soon displayed in the meeting. Regrettably, the live feed revealed little as most functioning cameras had already been destroyed. Still, the fleeting images before the screens went dark showed glimpses of the endless tide of swarm forces surging through. Cross no longer cared about preserving the base's privacy. Initially, she thought a few stray bugs had found their way inside. Now, she realized the situation was far more dire. The timing couldn't have been worse. With the base at its most vulnerable, the swarm's calculated assault didn't seem coincidental. Yet, her superior intellect made her reluctant to believe the bugs could orchestrate such a precise attack. But there was no time to dwell on such thoughts. The crisis was unfolding. She quickly ordered all airlocks sealed to delay the swarm's advance. Meanwhile, she issued a plea for help. Fortunately, the other commanders, now watching the surveillance footage, recognized the gravity of the situation. Yet, with forces currently committed to attacking various swarm nests, redeploying and arranging rescue teams would take at least 30 minutes even with the Riken ship's exceptional speed. The nearby garrison stationed in the pit zone could reach the base within 5 minutes. But before Cross could order them back, she received a distress call from that area. The pit defenses were under siege. Raiders had appeared from nowhere, launching suicide charges against the garrison. With most of their forces drawn away, the remaining troops, gunboats, and transports were struggling to hold out under the relentless swarm assault. Pit zone, other nests, and now the fortress base. Cold sweat trickled down Cross's back. The interconnected attacks reeked of a calculated scheme. Though she couldn't yet discern the swarm's true objective, it was undoubtedly ambitious. For now, she could only hope the reinforced airlocks would hold long enough. The base's massive size, countless rooms, and nearly identical layout could disorient even its Riken inhabitants without their personal navigational terminals. Combined with the sturdy doors, the bugs' primitive bodies would have difficulty breaking through. Additionally, the hallways were equipped with a few automated defense weapons controlled by the AI, all functioning as expected. She believed these measures could hold the swarm at bay for 30 minutes at least. She hoped so. Chapter 250, Recommendations. Underscore 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 underscore. Unfortunately, things rarely go as hoped. While the reinforced doors did slow the swarm's advance, it wasn't by much. Surveillance cameras continued to black out, albeit at a slightly slower pace than before. Moreover, the swarm seemed alarmingly familiar with the base's internal layout. By tracing the routes where cameras had gone offline, it became evident that the bugs were heading straight for the command center. Even when encountering base staff or scattered defensive personnel along the way, the swarm paid them no heed. There were no deviations or detours in their march. Had this not been an interspecies war, Cross might have suspected an insider had leaked the base's schematics to the enemy. At their current speed, it wasn't a matter of holding out for 30 minutes. The bugs would reach her in 10 minutes at most. The other commanders watching the surveillance feed shared her grim expression. Though the swarm's actions weren't beyond what they had displayed before, everything seemed unsettlingly deliberate. Cross, you must leave the command center immediately, Major General Porter advised. Meanwhile, gather as many personnel as you can and organize a defense. Avoid the swarm's route and hold out until reinforcements arrive. As her elder, Porter's advice carried weight, and Cross took it seriously. After some consideration, she realized it was the best course of action for now. She granted full control of the base's defense systems to the AI, then began evacuating with the command center staff. Using the guidance of their personal terminals to avoid the swarm, the group advanced through the base. Along the way, more personnel joined them. The current situation was unprecedented, the base had few remaining combat personnel. Even injured sentries had been pressed into duty earlier, underscoring the dire shortage of armed defenders. When she previously inquired with the surveillance team, Cross learned that contact with all sentry squads had been lost. Judging by the swarm's aggressive advance, their fates were likely sealed. Passing the medical bay, the group gained reinforcements. Aside from a few doctors and nurses, most were survivors rescued from the nests earlier. Some of them had been temporarily assigned to sentry duty, but many others were still recovering in the base due to slow physical recuperation. Though weakened from prolonged malnourishment and paralysis, and largely consisting of raw recruits, these individuals had undergone basic combat training. Compared to the clerks and administrators accompanying Cross, they were significantly more capable fighters. After stopping by an armory to pick up weapons, these reinforcements became the primary combat and security force for the group. Cross initially thought that using their superior knowledge of the base's layout to play a game of cat and mouse with the swarm would suffice until reinforcements arrived. Reality once again proved her wrong. After the wounded survivors joined her group, and she felt a brief surge of relief at gaining additional manpower, the bugs inexplicably seemed to locate her position. They stopped advancing toward the command center and instead redirected their assault toward her current location. Maybe it's because the larger group size made us easier to detect, Cross speculated. She had no idea how the swarm had pinpointed her, but considering their means of communication through limb vibrations, it was likely their auditory systems were highly developed. The noise generated by so many people moving together could have given them away. It seemed the most plausible explanation. With this in mind, she quickly instructed everyone to quiet their footsteps. Unfortunately, their location had already been exposed. Even though they reduced the noise, the swarm continued advancing toward them. Cross's mind froze momentarily under the pressure, unable to come up with any viable solutions. Thankfully, with so many people around, someone still had their wits about them. As they marched, Cross shared their predicament with the group, hoping someone might have an effective suggestion. One of the wounded stepped forward hesitantly. Her adjutant moved to stop him, but Cross waved him off. She recognized this soldier. His name was Kaida, the patrol team leader who first raised the alarm. Later, he was also the first survivor found in the granary. Cross had always thought his luck was extraordinary, otherwise, he'd have been long dead. Since Kaida had come forward, he likely had something worthwhile to suggest. As an experienced veteran rather than a fresh recruit, his advice was worth considering, even if she didn't necessarily have to follow it. "Commander, I recommend we head to the top-level hangar immediately," Kaida suggested in a hushed tone. "If we're cornered inside the base, we'll be in grave danger. The hangar likely still has transport or gunboats parked there. We can use them to escape into the air, out of the swarm's reach." Cross understood why Kaida spoke so quietly. With 300 to 400 people in the group, there probably wouldn't be enough ships to carry everyone. It was inevitable that some would have to be left behind. Though this thought pained her, she had no other options. She chose to ignore the potential fallout. "Do we have anyone who can pilot a ship?" she asked. Beyond the issue of capacity, finding someone to fly the ships was another concern. Clerks and medical staff weren't trained for such tasks. "No problem," Kaida replied confidently. "We may not be able to execute complex maneuvers, but we can at least take off." Cross nodded subtly. Taking off was enough. While the bugs could glide, they couldn't achieve sustained flight. Gaining altitude would mean safety. "Let's head to the top-level hangar," she ordered decisively, leading the group upward. They hadn't gone far when a muffled explosion rumbled from the base's lower levels. Moments later, the corridor lights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. Gasps and even some shrieks of panic erupted from the group, with a few female Reckon sobbing softly in fear. "Damn it! The bugs have sabotaged the base's power supply!" Cross exclaimed. She had already suspected this when she noticed one group of bugs diverting in a different direction earlier. Now, her fears were confirmed. Just as the lights died completely, they flickered back on, albeit dimmer. The base's backup power supply had activated. Before anyone could breathe a sigh of relief, another dull explosion echoed, and the corridor was once again plunged into darkness. This time, the blackout was total. The base only had a single backup generator, and it had been destroyed. The group, fully aware of this fact, descended into despair. Several of the more fragile-minded female Reckon broke down into muffled sobbing.